I wanted to show you the stand so you could see what the regeneration looks like a few years into the process. Cheryl, can you tell us a little bit about the history of this site?
Sure. So we're in Clearcut with reserves. I'm not sure if you can see behind me, but there are scattered mature trees left behind, and it's another, typical for this research forest, a relatively small Clearcut with reserves. It's about 5 hectares in area. So it's wide open, and it's a fairly moist, nutrient-rich site. So it was harvested in 2016 and planted in 2017.
So the trees are 3 years old, or it's been 3 years since they've been planted.
True, and in fact, because they were planted in the very early spring, this is actually, we're in the middle of its 4th growing season now in 2020. Mm-hmm. So these trees have had a little bit of time to get going, and there's also natural regeneration filling in. And really, we've actually picked a place that's fairly open. Really, the vegetation can get very thick very quickly. Again, with the mild climate and the abundance of nutrients, even more nutrients now being released because of the post-harvest disturbance, and just a really good moisture supply in a lower slope, gently sloping site like this. Okay. So really, it's greened up very quickly.
Mm-hmm. And I think if we look around, we can see a fair number of Douglas fir saplings. There's a few right around here. I also see there's a small cedar right here that's kind of overtopped by the thimbleberry. Would this be something that was planted, or do you think that's
no? I think that's a natural. So in this block there are cedar planted as well, but not just right in this spot where we're standing here. Mm-hmm. It's mostly Douglas fir, and there are some white pines around us too.
A couple white pines over.
Yeah, you might have to search a little for them. The Douglas fir are usually the quickest to gain height growth, and cedar and white pine put a little more time into their root system and don't start off as quickly as with height growth. So and you see some naturals for sure. I'm seeing quite a lot of natural cedar in here, and this is a natural western hemlock as well.
So you mentioned we're standing in a spot right now that's there's actually a little bit less other vegetation, and in some of the spots it's even thicker than
right.
That
It's
there.
Just microsite wise, it's a little bit of a higher mound, and we are on the upper part of a slope. Water flows downhill, and it just gets more and more moist as you go down into the block from where we're standing, and it's a little more disturbed up here. I see a little bit more mineral soil exposure, so we're in a spot that actually, at least it's not thick greenery right over our head. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to see very much very much of the regeneration at all. So
thinking of the management of this stand, if you have a stand like this where you have really vigorous natural vegetation coming in that perhaps is overtopping some of the tree regeneration that you're aiming for, what might you do or might you intervene in that case, and what might you do to try to help out the trees so that they can continue
Yeah, we expect it on a moist and nutrient-rich site like this with this kind of a level of disturbance. You are going to have, between the time of planting and when a stand is free growing, and we can talk about what that means later, but when it's free of the competing vegetation, in between that time, these more moist, rich sites, they generally need some brushing treatment. They need some intervention to help the planted trees that we've invested in, get free, get growing, and not get overtopped and completely engulfed by all the other competing vegetation.
Can you explain what brushing means? So
brushing is when you remove competing vegetation. That's just the meaning of the term, and it can be done by a whole lot of different methods. But in our case, it'd be done manually. So with motorized equipment, you can use either brush saws or chainsaws. That's typically what we do. Of course, one of the common alternatives, elsewhere in the world could be to use herbicides, and we don't use herbicides here for a number of reasons that I could get into another time. But it doesn't really matter. There's different methods to go about it.
I can imagine from just from a financial perspective, that might be an expensive thing to do. It seems like it would be relatively labor intensive too.
Yeah, it is. It is expensive. Yeah, absolutely. And herbicide can be, more effective and lower cost, but it depends because there are other kinds of environmental costs, and you need to have some scale too if you're going to do it, for example, aerially. And there are all kinds of issues here because there are non-target impacts, and there are impacts on research. There's wildlife, and we have a lot of streams and water courses through here, and you cannot impact those with herbicides. So it's actually very difficult to do here. It doesn't really save us in cost. And there are a lot of social issues too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of human use of these areas. We're on an urban interface, and it's really not a good place to be using herbicides for a whole host of reasons here.
And we stopped here mostly just to show a stand that was a few years into its regeneration. But this is also, this stand was harvested as part of a research project. Can you talk a little bit about what the aims of that research project are?
Yeah. So this is a research area where western red cedar that have been bred for browse resistance are planted here to test them.
And when you say browse resistance, you mean that they have certain chemicals or certain something in them that makes them less palatable to the deer, so the deer are going to be less inclined to eat the young growth.
That's right. Because deer chewing and eating up, browsing essentially on the western red cedar is a big issue here. All throughout the range of western red cedar, it's an issue, and it's become more of an issue because of human impacts on the ecosystem. Human impacts in terms of declines in the effectiveness and even the presence of some of the predators of those ungulates, and also just human disturbance makes it actually quite favorable for those deer and for ungulates. And so that's especially true closer to urban areas, so the deer can really overpopulate. And so having cedar seedlings that are genetically advantaged to resist deer browse could be really helpful to forest managers to get cedar reestablished. And it's a really valuable, really essential species. It's a keystone species in the ecosystem. We really don't want to lose it. So this is a really great idea to help make sure that it's sustained on the landscape. It's a part of the ecology here, and we definitely want cedar to be able to continue.
Yeah.
So on a research site like this, we can compare these ones that have been genetically bred to be, unpalatable, because of their foliage chemistry to be unappealing to deer, and we can compare those with normal cedar that has not been bred.
Okay. And I think you've said that of the trees that the main species that you work with here and that are naturally growing here, cedar is the one that is really disproportionately impacted by the browse of the deer. It
is, yeah. That's the one that the deer really favor here in in the coastal rainforests here as a winter food. It really is. This is not the case everywhere. Deer are found all over the continent and in other parts of the world and in different ecosystem types. They have different habits, different browsing and foraging habits and different needs. But here in these coastal rainforests, western red cedar is very important for them for getting through the winter.
Yeah, so this time of year there's plenty of forage that the deer are able to browse on, but
right.
then in the winter when these plants have lost their leaves, and actually, is that from brushing or is that from browsing?
This
here?
is browsing. In fact, I was going to say you can see deer browse right here. They've
Yeah.
actually been eating this shrubby vegetation. So in the growing season, they're very, very happy to have all of this really palatable, really nutritious, nutrient-rich, shrubby and herbaceous vegetation. But when that all dies down in the winter, they really rely on the western red cedar.